So we'll kick things off today with, I think, probably unarguably the more famous of the two, with Shaun of the Dead. So Drew, would you like to give us a bit of a rundown on that?
Oh, for God's sake, he's got an arm off! An episode of their sitcom Spaced, in which Simon Pegg's Tim hallucinates fighting off a zombie horde after an extended, speed-fueled Resident Evil 2 session on the PlayStation, provided the germ of the idea for Pegg and director Edgar Wright's paean to George Romero's zombie movies. Marketed as a romantic comedy with zombies, though more accurately really it's a bromantic comedy with zombies, Shaun of the Dead, co-written by Pegg and Wright, tells the tale of Shaun, played by Pegg, a sales worker without much drive or purpose, who spends most of his time down the pub or playing games with his friend from childhood Ed, Nick Frost, or the rest of the time disappointing his girlfriend Liz, Kate Ashfield, or his mum Barbara, played by Penelope Wilton. When a radiation-contaminated probe returning from space passes over southeast England, Shaun finds himself in the middle of a zombie apocalypse and must save his girl, his mum and his friend. As this is both an homage to and pastiche of classic zombie films, particularly those of Romero, the actual plot and events therein are pretty familiar. But, as with all of the best parodies and pastiches, Shaun of the Dead comes from a place of both deep familiarity with and, crucially, affection and respect for the genre which it is parodying. Something, for example, the Wayans brothers ought to have considered at some point. There is also a distinctly British spin put on things, beyond the tea references before any Americans listening make that joke, though those are in there to be sure. So many American films have the survivors as A, instantly gun-toting, and B, crack shots. Shaun and Ed's first encounter with The Walking Dead sees them grabbing handfuls of kitchen implements, amongst which a toaster and a mug tree, and then immediately demonstrating them as being completely incapable of hitting a barn door. The usual breakdown of the dynamic of the group of survivors is present and accounted for, but here it presents itself as name-calling and petty bickering, which is both very funny and very realistic. This sort of casual, believable banter is one of the reasons that other British films, like Dog Soldiers for instance, work so well, and so it is here. The film also has fun with the idea of the slow and shuffling zombie, using the time to generate more moments of comedy. The interplay between the core group is really very entertaining, with everyone in that group being given a moment to shine and deliver at least one really funny line. From Barbara's, "They were a bit bitey," to the great Dylan Moran's David's, "Lizzie, how can you put your faith in a man you spectacularly bin for being unreliable? A man whose idea of a romantic night spot and an impregnable fortress are the same thing." Though it's Frost and Pegg who get the lion's share. This is all brought together with Edgar Wright's distinctive directing and editing style, alongside his always entertaining choreographing of action with music. Poor old John in the pub. Also, see Wright's recent Baby Driver for the apogee of this technique. Pegg and Wright's script is, as well as very funny, clever, with lots of moments of foreshadowing in what, on first viewing, would seem entirely normal and unremarkable lines. Shaun of the Dead is, as I have mentioned, a loving taking of the piss of classic zombie films that absolutely stands alone as a comedy horror film, but rewards those familiar with the genre with plenty of extra jokes and references. All of which, in the end, leaves us with two questions. 1. Should you watch it? That's an easy one to answer. Yes, very much so. And 2. Can dogs look up? That's a question for the ages.
Yeah. You know, I've never been the world's biggest fan of Shaun of the Dead. I like it a lot less than Hot Fuzz, which I think is just an incredible film. And this, I'm not sure I've actually seen it since I watched it in cinema 14 years ago or whatever it is. And I thought it was all right then, and haven't really thought about it all that much since. And I'm reasonably sure I've not actually seen it until this time round. I did enjoy it quite a bit more this time, I believe, if my faulty memory can go back that far. Perhaps that's just having watched it so close to mainlining that many zombie films for the previous episode, then maybe it's given me a bit more of a context around it. But it was certainly always quite funny. I'm also not the world's biggest fan of Spaced or anything like that. I think it's fine. It's funny enough, but I'm not like a huge super fan of it or anything like that. But yeah, I did enjoy the banter and the interplay between not Johnny Vegas and Simon Pegg. There's also nice little touches, nice little callbacks. I like the sort of, I guess it's a spaced callback really, but the kind of alternate troop of survivors go another way. That was quite a nice little touch. There was also really nice little touches all the way throughout it that make it it was certainly an easy thing to recommend to people if you haven't seen it already. I don't know how different it is in culture between sort of here and America, in a sense that this was fairly successful in the UK. I think fairly well publicised. I think most people would now know about Shaun of the Dead. I don't know if that's the case in America. I expect it's maybe a little bit more obscure over there, but certainly for UK bods it's probably a bit more commonplace, and it's certainly really well worth watching if you haven't done so already.
Yeah, I know that there's quite a cult following, at least, for the Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg Cornetto trilogy, of which this is the first entry, the very famous now 3 flavours Cornettos.
Yeah. Whether
it was much more widely known than that, I suspect not. I was similar to you in that when I first saw this, I thought it was all right. I have watched it a few times since, because I've done a few viewings of the whole Cornetto trilogy together, and I've actually liked it more each time I've seen it. And this most recent viewing, is certainly no exception. I was finding myself laughing a lot throughout it.
I can see that, because for a light-hearted knockabout thing, it's actually quite a layered and dense script for this sort of comedy outing. So it probably would reward that, I think. Yeah,
especially because some of it is, like I say, there's just some simple dialogue things about. For instance, one of the early things is Nick Frost saying, "Oh well, I'll just go and live in the shed then." You know, it's like entirely legitimate thing to say. That's what actually happened. So that's kind of interesting. And so it's not like a major plot point. It's not particularly important or anything. There's nice little touches like that. And a lot of Edgar Wright's work has a lot of really interesting stuff going on in the background. Mm-hmm. As well as just, like I say, the choreography with music and his framing of things. Yeah. And the way it's edited, it's always been really good, and then it gets better. But you see it really. It's actually his second feature film, but he did one like 9 years before for £15,000, which him and his mum and dad have probably seen, and not how many more people. Yeah, you see the beginnings of that there, and then there's, if you've seen the rest of the Cornetto trilogy as well, there are little bits that tie into that kind of running gags that you're seeing beginning here, like the fences in Hot Fuzz, a very famous scene in Fences, but in Shaun of the Dead, it's him failing to do it, to jump over a fence successfully. And there's a lot of stuff there, and it just builds, and also the more zombie films you see, the more things you might pick up on. And some of that I got from the beginning, but there's like nice little touches, like you just hear snippets of news reports in the background about rage-infected monkeys and things like that, and all the other different explanations there's been in various zombie films for why the zombies are there. Yeah, it's just fun. It's, in one way you can think it's absolutely throwaway. It's just really quality comedy, and I think it does actually reward repeat viewing. And I just want to say again just how much I enjoy just that sort of... It just feels to me, I don't know if it's just a British thing or not, or just maybe the way British films are made rather than being particularly British. But that zombie films always have like the survivors arguing and they fall out and things. But in most zombie films, it always feels like this is happening in a filmy sort of way. In Shaun of the Dead, it feels like it's happening in a real sort of way, because it's just like needling and bickering and people calling each other twats and things, rather than some sort of grand argument. It feels just more like the way people actually talk when they're friends together. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have much more to say. It's interesting. Just quickly to go back to your point about it, whether it was successful in the United States or not, given film's box office can be relatively limited in this country, certainly compared to the huge sums you often get in the United States. I'm guessing it must have had some success there, and maybe the rest of the world too. And we come back to the theme we mentioned in our previous episode, that at least for the successful zombie movies, they tend to be a hell of an investment money-wise, because both this and the film we'll talk about in a minute, relatively small budgets, the other film particularly so, and then making a lot of money on top. This had a budget of £6 million and ended up making 30. Yeah. Good zombie films are really cheap to make, but can make a heck of a lot of money in return. So a really common theme in these films we've watched for some reason.
Yes. I don't know. I always remember Shaun of the Dead as being one of the few films I've ever got hate mail for a review of, which is, and it was factually incorrect hate mail as well, because they said, "Oh, they didn't say anything about a comet coming back and starting this." It's like, yes, they did. 6 minutes in, pay more attention, haters. Come back when you're correct.
That's right at the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, this thing it's because it's passing over southeast England, which is where they are.
Yes, and it's obviously a direct callback to the Romero stuff. But,
yeah.
I don't know. Some people, you just can't get the critics these days.
I don't know. Sometimes people just say the strangest things. I do remember, I mean, a complete aside, but just because you brought up, I remember you also getting hate mail for a review of that terrible Paul Walker film, Running Scared.
Oh, yeah.
In which somebody criticised you and told you that it was a mainstream cult hit. And that sentence still breaks my mind to this day.
I mean, I can see why you would defend Running Scared, because Paul Walker is so dreamy, but he's also in a terrible film. So
a mainstream cult hit, yeah. That's I'm never forgetting that line anytime soon.